Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event at the Poison Pen. We're somewhere over 500 and enjoying every single one of them. It's so much fun. I apologize for being late to this one. It's all my fault, but here we are. So we are reunited again with Tess Gerritsen, one of our favorite authors, who I'm happy to say has been able to get to the pen for most of her books, but not this time. She's the author of the fabulous Rizzoli and Isle series and assorted other books as the spirit moves her, sometimes in really interesting directions. And here she's paired up with a friend. And is it pronounced Braver or Braver, Gary?
Braver.
Okay, Gary Braver, which is actually a pseudonym for an academic who, in the tradition, I think, of English academics and judges who always wrote their crime novels under pseudonyms, is joining in, and they have together created what I have found is a new genre, you two. It's called dark academia, and I just read about it today, which I love. There's been this whole thing about Gothic novels and all of the permutations of them. My current favorite is commuter Gothic, which means it happens on a train or a bus. But dark academia is, it's easy to think of Donna Tartt, but there are other authors who, Carol Goodman, for example, wrote a great book called In the Lake of Dead Languages, her first novel, which was in this tradition. And we're going to talk about that. Let me say before I go any further that Tess has kindly signed copies of this wonderful book called Choose Me. And we still have a few left. And if we run out, we can get more. And Patrick will put a buy link into the comments field where he is lurking in the void and is happy to take your Facebook questions, and he'll rejoin us and present those questions as we go. So you two, what made you decide that you wanted to write a book set on campus? Gary, maybe I should ask you that since you're the one who's actually on campus.
Actually, we met at a cocktail party, a Christmas party a few years ago, and it was at the height of the Me Too movement, and a lot of people are getting disgraced. And Tess said, maybe we should write a book that examines both sides of an illicit affair. He said, she said kind of thing. And I thought it was a great idea. And so I sent her a chapter a few weeks later. And she was probably aghast, said, well, you're really jumping in feet first. And she responded with a chapter, and we went back and forth. And, the two sides of an illicit affair, and that's what we decided to do. That Tess would write the point of view chapters, female point of view chapters, and I would write the male point of view chapters. Hers being the student, Karen Moore, as well as Frankie Loomis, the homicide detective, and I did the college professor who has an affair with Karen. And that's how it began at a Christmas party some years back. Yeah.
It's really astonishing in the annals of crime fiction how many ideas, good and bad, begin at a bar. I mean, drinking has played a major role in the production of crime fiction. And any veteran of a mystery conference will know that all the action at the conference actually takes place at the bar. Right, Tess?
It's my favorite place. And by the way, Belvedere Martini, if you ever meet me at a bar, that's what I want. So
let's add a contract.
It's very true. I mean, I think there's something about lubrication and alcohol where all of a sudden the synapses start to move in weird new ways. Yeah. And it's exactly how Gary described it. We were just talking about the Me Too movement, and I've always been interested in how men and women can see the same situation in completely different ways. Mm-hmm. So my idea was, okay, so we have this illicit affair, and and on the surface, it looks like a typical Me Too thing where the professor has an affair with his student and the professor is married. Bad professor. But maybe there's another side to the story. And that's how it all got started. I think the fun part was that we did not really know where it was going. All we knew, we started off knowing that the student would end up dead. And who killed her? Was it the professor? We didn't know. So we just sort of plunged into this whole idea. And the fun part was that I think that we or our characters tormented each other. Gary would write a chapter and I would write a chapter in response. And if we just kind of kept upping the ante as the book went on.
Right. It was fun.
Yeah. Taryn is the student in question. So how did you collaborate to invent her backstory? Because you're right. I mean, if she dies, there must be a considerable backstory involved. So did you collaborate on that, or did you do that alternately, or how'd you write about Taryn?
Well, Gary gave me a couple of ideas based on the fact that he is a college student and he deals with female students all the time. So he had a good feeling about what kind of situations and what kind of things are troubling young women today. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to make neither one of these was going to be totally a victim, and neither one of these is going to be totally a villain. We wanted them to both have good and bad sides. So I wanted Taryn to start off being, I guess we would be sympathetic towards her because she is a bit of a victim. She's in terrible pain from having been rejected by her boyfriend. She is vulnerable. She is needy. But where does that neediness turn, and when does it become dark? And when does it become obsessive? So I think that was really what I was going for, is I was trying to find out how, when do you cross the line from being somebody who is an object of sympathy to someone who becomes someone we're afraid of? So that she developed on the page as we worked on the story. I think both these characters developed as we were writing the book.
So Gary, have you run into students like this?
Oh, I hope not. I have run into students with problems.
Right.
I have not run into a student who is making a pass at me or is just trying to start an affair with another professor. But I certainly have met students who are troubled, who are needy, who have had broken relationships with guys and feeling very vulnerable and sometimes even suicidal. I had one student maybe 3 years ago who said she had the worst week of her life and she's really thinking of ending it. And so, I called someone who deals with stuff like that because I didn't feel qualified. And she finally came out okay. But I have, in small courses like seminars, such as this course in the book, you only get a cap of 15 students. You get to know them over 3.5, 4 months very well. And they come to you for not just academic guidance, but personal guidance, family issues. So they sometimes spill over and let you know what's going on. And so that informed me in some ways what Taryn might have. Kids come to me and say, they have a broken family, father left the mother and her as a baby years ago. So that I gave to Tess, and she laced that into the development of Taryn, which she did very, very well.
It's an interesting thought, and obviously wouldn't fit with your Me Too design, but it would be interesting to write about a male student and a female professor in a similar situation, because really, I don't think that we can always assume that it's going to be a female who's the victim and a male professor who's either a predator or just really unwise or unlucky or a combination thereof. I mean, I think it's not so often written that the opposite dynamic, but I think that it's a valid one, especially today when women are trying to own, what is the current phrase? Women are trying to have agency, demanding agency. One of my least favorite words.
That would be an interesting turnabout. And in fact, I think that if I were to write that story, once again, weirdly enough, I would have a woman end up dead.
Okay, and why is that?
I think there's something interesting. Well, maybe because I'm a woman myself, and women readers, we identify with the victims more than anything, I believe. So if it's a male student and a female professor, somehow I would be more engaged in it as a reader if it was the woman who died. It's some weird psychological thing going on here, but there's a reason why so many crime novels involve dead women.
Well, it's possibly because in real life, more violence is perpetrated on women than vice versa, or when it's perpetrated on guys, it tends to be guys, attacking guys in some sort of situation. Rather than women attacking guys. But I just think it's interesting, if we're going to give agency to women, then we should make them ruthless killers or accidental killers, as the case may be.
Actually, Taryn has agency in this book. She is pretty aggressive. I mean, she is as much victimizing as a victim too. I mean, of circumstances, and we wanted to give nuances to each. So neither are Karen and Jack exonerated nor fully vilified. There's this gray, portraits in gray is what we wanted rather than black and white. It would be interesting, however, to have a novel where a female professor, not being predatory, but takes up with a male student. And it would still have to make each character somewhat sympathetic so that it works without forcing this into the old mold by just reversing the genders.
We had a real life case here in Scottsdale of a woman who was quite a lot older than the teenage boy, and a woman student who in fact was the predator. Got a lot of press here, but it was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was high school.
Yes.
When the college situation.
It was high school, yeah.
I'm sorry, Tess, I cut you off. What was it you were going to say?
Oh, I was sort of bouncing off what Gary had said about the fact that Taryn, our so-called victim, does have a lot of agency, and that's what I really liked about writing her, is that she's fierce. She is somebody who is really, alive and passionate. And even though her passion takes her down a dark hole, she's not going to sit back passively and let things happen to her. In a way that there's a lot of the book really looks at literary heroines, and that's why Gary and I chose an English professor who's teaching a course about star-crossed lovers. And among these star-crossed lovers are women like Medea, who is betrayed and fights back very viciously. And then you have other women like Queen Dido, who is betrayed and commits suicide. So there's this whole spectrum of how women respond to being betrayed. And Taryn has a choice. Is she going to be like Medea, or is she going to be like Dido? And is she going to be fierce, or is she going to be passive? So she has role models in literature, and who does she choose to behave like?
Well, you've answered my question about why he was an English professor, because I mean, this could have taken place in the chemistry building or something.
Right.
So Gary, you teach at a smaller college. You're both living in Maine, right?
No, I teach at a very large college, a Northeastern University in Boston.
Oh, okay.
Tess lives in Maine. I live outside of Boston. Yeah.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So, did you model the campus on, your own university?
Sure. Yeah. I modeled on Northeastern, but called it the Commonwealth University. It happens to be located exactly where Northeastern is located, across the Museum of Fine Arts, which is it's a locale in the book. But yeah, I know that place well, and so I just changed names of buildings and people, and people have shuffled around in the space that would be familiar to anyone who knows that particular campus. Yeah.
But even if it's a big campus, basically you're creating a kind of Agatha Christie country house environment when you.
Sure.
I mean, the campus doesn't have physical boundaries to the extent that a castle or a manor house or something would, but nonetheless, it is a closed community, which makes it easier to contain your cast and what happens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So I guess the bigger Arizona State here is just ludicrously large. I mean, it's like 100,000 students with multiple campus. So you'd have to narrow it down. I guess that's why I was thinking that you knew a small college, because it just seemed to me that that fit this design better. But
yeah, well, I mean, it's large, and it's probably 15,000 students as opposed to 50,000 students. 15,000 is large enough, and yet there's a small quality about the classrooms. That's why we made the course that Taryn takes with Jack a seminar called Star-Crossed Lovers, which also has built into its name the irony that star-crossed implies fate, that it was fate or the gods that moved me into your arms. It's all choice, and that's what we wanted to do philosophically, say you are responsible for your actions, and that's what this book is. That's part of the gray portraits and the nuances. They did this to each other. It's not fated. So which is a theme within the book too. Yeah.
Well, I think the other theme that comes through is how one mistake, a moment of weakness, can destroy your life. And how far would you go to save everything you love? And this is where we had to struggle a little bit with the fact that our main character really is Jack. Jack is the hero of this book, and yet he does something really terrible. So how do you redeem that character? That was one of the challenges of the story, and the fact that we have two characters who are really not necessarily good people. So we have to have reasons to root for Jack as his life spirals out of control. And that was Gary's mission in this whole book, was how do you make this man likable?
And how did you?
Made him feel guilty, made him feel regretful, made him wish he had never done what he had done. He does not stand in front of the mirror and say, Taryn made me do this, or my wife, who is, kind of cool in her passion, made me do this. I made me do this. So after they actually, start their affair, which is very brief, he is quite contrite. And I imagine myself violating my own marriage vows to my wife and violating Title IX, compliance at every university in America now, where your job is at stake. And I imagine, oh my God, if I ever did this, how would I feel? And I just projected that into the psyche of Jack, and I think made him somewhat sympathetic. At least understandable.
Yeah, the stakes are unquestionably high for Jack. I mean, he's rolling the dice against his marriage, his career, as you say, which adds to his desperation. Let me go back to what you said about, if you look at characters like Isolde or Medea, very often, Isolde particularly, there was a whole thing about, the gods made them do it, or it wasn't their fault. I mean, Isolde drank the potion, right? So falling in love with Tristan. I mean, I had a conversation with a woman who's written a variation on Camelot, but she's written it from the point of view of the Lady of the Lake. And, I asked her if she could explain, or did she explain in her book, why Guinevere rolled the dice, in the way that she did, and brought down, not just a marriage, but a kingdom and the whole bit. What possible excuse can there be for Guinevere? And, and the explanations almost always are, it wasn't really her fault. There was like a supernatural force at work, or, whatever. And I'm going, no, no, she actually didn't have to do that.
And everybody wants to blame somebody else, but it's just basically human frailty and temptation. It's something that every human being deals with in every, throughout their lives. So what happens when you yield to that? And that's what we were exploring. We can't blame anybody else but these characters for doing what they did.
Right, but they have to get to a critical point in their lives, whether it's boredom, or whether it's fear of a failing marriage, or whether it's, turning the classic, middle-aged man, is this all there is? Whatever, or the desperate student or something. You have to put them in a crucible, really, before they make bad choices. At least you hope that you do.
And we have to understand why they do, and put ourselves in their shoes, and understand, I could have done that too. It could have been me in a moment of weakness. So
I'm sorry. Barbara, the most gratifying part of the reviews we have read online have been those that said these characters are very realistic. And that, again, exactly what Tess said, many reviewers said it creates a circumstance that is probably not going to end well, but you still yield to the id, drive, whatever it is, and you cross that line. That is the realism we were trying to create. Jack has regret. Taryn has. There are two poles of the literary antecedents you talked about. There are two poles that she finds herself between, which is pretty much the polarity of the whole book, in terms of female reaction. You have Medea, who is wronged by Jason. They have two children, and in the middle of their marriage, he takes off for the princess of Corinth. And so what does Medea do? She kills her 2 children and she slays the princess. It's just getting back in a big time way. The other pole is what Tess mentioned, Queen Dido. She's married to Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid, and when he takes off to found Rome and amplify his legacy, she gets on top of her funeral pyre and commits suicide with a sword. So it's either suicide or I'm going to go after this guy and seek revenge, and that is kind of what we have in the polarity of Taryn, and she is realistic. She's not the crazy Glenn Close in help me with the title, Fatal Attraction,
Right.
but she is obsessed. She is needy. She is hungering for love, and that is recognizable, I think. And I think that Tess did a great job in creating a very realistic, obsessed young woman.
Des, do you think that vindictiveness is more a female trait than a male trait?
No, I don't think so. I think it goes to either gender. I mean, we all have to hear stories about ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends stalking their former lovers. You know, driving by their house, seeing who they're dating now. You know, maybe stalking them online through social media. That's not uncommon, and I think it happens in both male and females.
Right.
No, I agree. I mean, there have been actually laws being passed about, revenge porn and, breakup porn and all the rest of it, or messages. So yeah, I think men, I'm always curious though. I'm not sure that men are so much vindictive as they are not believing that this could happen to them. I mean, I often think that is the male ego just refusing to accept it. Whereas I think women can actually be more vindictive. I'm probably not saying this very well, but
maybe women are more vindictive in a different way.
yeah.
Maybe women retaliate in ways that are emotional and psychological, while men maybe retaliate in more physical ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that could be. And, I think in both cases, loss has a lot to do with it. The loss of a lover, loss of a family, loss of something can drive people to really desperate extremes.
And it's degrees. I mean, okay, you go in and you stalk them on Facebook. That's one thing. But then you break into their homes. That's another thing. And you steal little souvenirs. That's another thing. And the next thing you know, it's a gun. So it's where is Taryn going to finally stop this escalating stalking of her lover? And when does it go from, yeah, I can see myself doing that, to, oh my gosh, she's nuts.
Yeah, right.
So tell us about the structure of the novel. You've talked about, we've talked all around it, but how did you actually structure the narrative for this book?
Well, it was interesting because we wrote it in a chronological way. We started it off with the beginning of the affair, and then 2/3 of the way through the first draft, she's dead, and then the last third is the investigation. So we finished it that way. And then our editor made an interesting suggestion. She said, I love the female detective in this, that Frankie Loomis, who only comes into the story 2/3 of the way through, because that's when she's coming in to investigate the murder. So the editor said, we want to see her right from the beginning. Why don't we move Frankie early on in the book? And the only way to do that was to open up with the murder. So that changed everything. Suddenly, we're doing a before and after structure. The first chapter is when the body of Taryn is discovered. Detective Loomis walks in, and we know there's a murder, but we don't know how it happened. The metaphor I always like to use is, we come across a train wreck. Now let's find out how the train got wrecked. And we go back in time and we go back and trace how this affair happened, and up to the point of when she dies.
So did you create Frankie together? I mean, is this a character that you both contributed to?
She's a woman, so I did her.
That's serious.
Yeah, you know what I loved about Frankie is she's middle-aged. I found her fun to write because she's an experienced, she's a detective. She has twin daughters who are difficult. They're now 18. She's a mom. And when she walks onto the scene and she sees dead Taryn, she knows, because she's a mom, mother's instinct, that something is not right. This was not a suicide. The little clues come to her very quickly because she's seeing things through different, maybe the eyes of a man would not be able to, to notice these details. So that was what I had fun with. Frankie I like to think of her as Jane Rizzoli in 20 years.
Well, there you are, because you had some experience doing that. Are you both happy with, with that suggestion that the way you rewrote the book or restructured the book to make it come out that way?
Of
I
course,
thought it was
yeah,
brilliant.
absolutely, sure. I mean, it also makes sense that we begin with the dead body. I mean, the book is billed as a murder mystery. If you wait to chapter 25, when she finally shows up dead, that seems a little odd. So it was a great idea to move it up front.
Well, there are books that are structured where you take much longer to get to know the victim. I was talking to Deborah Crombie at an event last week. One of her most successful books, the murder isn't committed till 156 pages in, and it's deliberate because she really wanted you to mourn the victim, and so you needed to spend a lot of time getting to know the victim, and you also needed to be surprised that this turns out to be the victim, because I mean, you're actually thinking there's no murder in this book. What am I doing here? But it all kind of comes out that way. And I thought it was a really interesting thing for her to do, but it is unusual.
Yeah, it is interesting and it is unusual. And I think that's the kind of thing that an editor will go, that doesn't work for us. So right. It's because I think that the market is looking at a murder mystery and they're thinking, wait, if the murder takes place at page 160, then I lose out on the investigation somehow. But I think what Deborah Crombie did sounds like a fantastic way to it's just it's just harder commercially, I think.
Well, it is, but I mean, she's writing British mystery, which, almost inevitably has often has a slower pace anyway. But I thought it was brilliant, although, as I say, definitely unusual. So Tess, you're accustomed to writing procedurals, although you've done many other kinds of books. So to you, this is a police investigation as well as a psychological probe of these characters?
It's both, yeah. From the point of view of Detective Loomis, it's a procedural. And from the point of view of Tarrant, it's a nightmare. It's a disaster that just spins out of control. That's the psychological part.
Well, let's talk a little more about the professor, because I thought he was a wonderful character. His actual name is Jack Dorian. So yeah. Gary, I assume you don't know anybody just like Jack, or at least I hope not, but you must have run into a number of male professors that helped you envision this guy.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, he's a bad boy me. There you are. And I have a much richer fantasy life than I have as a real one. So in a sense, I just imagine, if I took to a female in my class, what would I do? Particularly if I'm a little frustrated at the home life. And I just exaggerated that. I just projected that. We did have some, back when I first started teaching in the 70s, it was very interesting. Professors dated their students, and particularly the younger ones who were almost the same age. In fact, at least three of my colleagues married their own students. And back in the 70s, which is the height of the sexual revolution, people looked the other way. And it was only until more recently that it's certainly discrimination. That's favoritism, and that you're fraternizing with a student, over whom you have grades, and someone actually got caught trading sex for grades or grades for sex, and he was immediately terminated. This is maybe 20-something years ago, but it's since then that things have really come down very hard on any kind of fraternization with students, particularly over whom you have some kind of supervisory control. Grades or thesis advising. I don't know anyone in particular, but in many ways, Jack is an amalgam of several people through whom I just force my own kind of, prejudices or desires, and how I imagined him in a situation. And thankfully, that ain't me.
Well, don't you think all this is really addressing a power imbalance? I mean, if you go back to Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, really, it was the I mean, I think myself, she was the greater actor in that drama, but that's just my opinion, possibly based on the dress. But I mean, seriously, but at the same time, the real argument was that there was an imbalance of power.
Yes.
And, it's going on right now with Governor Cuomo, who I gather just resigned today rather than face impeachment. And, as you point out, if somebody has some sort of power over another person, it's an unequal relationship, which would be true of professors and students.
Right.
For sure.
What is interesting is that Karen also is very smart and very observant. She senses a frustration in him. She flatters him. She even says at one point, "Would you ever date a student?" And then she flatters him by, he says, "No, I would not. I'm married." First of all, I'm married. Secondly, it's against the rules. And she says, "That's what I like about you. You're really honest and you're really loyal." And then she turns around and seduces him, or allows himself to be seduced, put it that way. Yeah.
I think there's a big temptation oftentimes among young women, coming into their own sexual prowess and so forth to see if they can seduce people. I mean, I'll go back to Monica and say, I think that was part of it, and I mean, where, literature, films and all are littered, with seductresses or temptresses or, women who want to test men and whether men can hold up, can push back and survive that is a pretty common story thing, nothing.
When you're a young woman, that is your power, your sexuality. Yeah, I mean, you don't have money, you don't have power in every other way, but that is the one thing that you have over a man. So yeah, it's a tool. They may choose to use it.
Well, it's a tool, but I also think that because they haven't necessarily wielded it for a very long time, it may be a tool they don't really understand the power attached to it. You can think it's not going to go to as bad a place as it might go. And so, that can be, I can hardly remember when I was young, so it's hard for me to go back and think about this, but I keep scratching my head because I don't know why. I guess I itch. Anyway, I think it's a wonderful book, and obviously you guys had a great time collaborating. Are you thinking of doing this again?
Well, we both have other projects that we have to we in our own sphere. So I don't think we have any plans to do any more collaboration. The other thing is, this took twice as long as any other book.
Sure. Well, I can certainly see that.
Yeah.
Right. So Gary, I know Tess is publishing history, but do you have a publishing history, not necessarily in crime fiction, that we should explore?
I write medical thrillers or biomedical thrillers, science thrillers, some archaeological, some pharmacological, and they've all done pretty well. This is a diversion. Choose me because it's a cop procedural novel, and it's character driven. So this was a fun diversion for me. I've written 2 other books that had cops in them, homicide cops. But the 6 books I have, this is the 9th book, 6 of them are science thrillers, not science fiction, but like Elixir is, developing an anti-aging drug. Another one is Gray Matter, boosting the intelligence of children from parents who want to raise geniuses. And Flashback is an alleged cure for Alzheimer's disease that has a side effect that sends people into reliving bad scenes over and over again. So they've all been research heavy. My background's in science, so I was able to find medical people in Boston who love talking shop, and in Boston, the medical center of the universe, doctors will just help you out with your research. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
Well, you seemed, for an academic, extremely comfortable, writing this kind of book. So
I love to do it. Yeah.
Right. No, it seemed obvious that you must have had you couldn't be a virgin at this and do it so well.
No. And not with Tess asking me if she wants to co-author a novel.
Well, it's really been, it was a wonderful book to read, and I'm so glad that it's out there and doing well. Patrick, why don't we call you up and see if we have questions from the audience they might like to I have to make sure he's actually, it is, there he is.
There he is.
I'm here at my post. Let's see. Well, some of these questions you've actually already answered.
Well,
Melissa writes, what inspired you to write together? You've kind of gone into that. Let's see here. Can you tell us a little bit more, like nuts and bolts, about how the collaborative process worked in your case? Would you divide up the spoils? Would some of you, write a first draft and the other one follow along and polish it up? Or how did that work? How did you divide it up?
It was split up really pretty much down male and female lines. If there was a male point of view, Jack's point of view, that was Gary's job. And if it was a female point of view, that was my job, because we wanted to see how differently we would approach this affair and how we would look at it differently. I did the final edit just because I wanted to make sure that everything hung together well. And we would make suggestions to each other. I think there were things that I wrote that Jack would say, a student would never do that, or a student would never say that. And there were things that, interestingly enough, that Jack would say, and I would respond, oh, that is so creepy, you got to take that out. So I think that I'm very sensitive to my audience, and my audience is primarily female. And I know there are some things that men may think or men may say that are going to turn off these readers. And so, we had to tone down Jack a little bit to make him more acceptable as a hero.
I deferred to Tess. But I had some good jokes I'm going to recycle elsewhere.
okay. I should go back and reemphasize the point they were making, that part of the reason to do this was to look at a situation from the male and female perspective. Right. And did you learn from each other doing that? I mean, did Gary surprise you, Tess? And did Tess surprise you, Gary?
Well, okay, I'm gonna say that there was a scene where Jack first sees Tara, and he responds to her, or he looks at her in a fairly sexualized way. And I said, do men really feel this way? Is that how men really see women when they first meet an attractive face? And because if that's the way it is, I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel comfortable. So I asked my husband, and my husband says, yeah, that's the way we think. I'm sorry to say. So yes, Jacob was on your side. So I think I was introduced to the fact that, yeah, we do look at the other gender in different ways. I think men look at women in a far more sexualized way. And well, I can't speak for other women, but I just feel that when I look at a man, I'm not necessarily thinking, oh, I'd like to sleep with him. I'm thinking, oh, he has nice eyes, or he's funny, or he has, he's charming. And I'm not sure that's the way men think about us.
Well, I can't help but feel, Tess, that power is a real, like a pheromone for women. Women can be, I'm serious, can really be attracted to, we see examples of it all the time, to power, sometimes money, but I'm not sure that power isn't the more, sometimes it's just a mercenary thing. Okay. A woman is interested in more money than she's going to accumulate on her own. But I think that powerful men exude some sort of something that can draw women in, where I think women often exude some kind of a sexual pheromone that draws men in, because the women don't necessarily have any power. I do think it's a different biological reaction. And I say this, I'm going to tell you this in part because my Stanford University magazine that I read every month has an ad in it from a woman who is marketing pheromones. That's right, to attract men, and I'm going, seriously, does that really work? Because I've never tried it. But it is in every issue of the Stanford magazine.
It's also in every issue of Smithsonian magazine.
Yeah, you're right. It's in there too. So I'm not making it up that that there's a chemical thing that may well be going on, and that that might be part of the reason that men and women respond differently.
My husband and I have this thing we call, what's her DQ? And that is desirability quotient.
Oh, okay.
And you measure either gender by their desirability quotient. And a man can make up for the fact that he's not attractive by being extremely funny, extremely intelligent, or extremely rich. And that can up his DQ. For women, it doesn't matter if they're extremely funny. Well, maybe rich matters, but what matters most for a woman is that she's attractive. And that just seems to be the way that men are geared. It probably is evolutionary. They're looking for somebody who can bear their children and spread their genes. So
But that's, that's true. If you look at biology, that's often true where the male is supposed to have, like the peacock, the fabulous tail feathers and all, because that makes him more desirable to the female peacocks. So it isn't always that the female has to look more attractive in nature. Very often it's actually the male that has to be, like the elk with the horns and the whole bit. And I think it's Darwin in action. I mean, I think it's basically, that the most attractive, the most powerful, whatever, are the ones that get to mate and keep it going. Which, let's take it to the vaccine argument. I missed your opening discussion while I was, somewhere else before we started here. But, I've decided I am totally Darwinian about this. That people who take the vaccine are going to have a better chance of survival than people who won't. And, I've read some of the arguments. There was one in the Wall Street Journal today. I was just totally baffled by this guy. But they truly believe it. And yet at the same time, they're rolling the dice against survival,
Is it possible? Yeah, maybe Darwin is or Darwinian evolution is it's working against people who are dupes, who are easy to pull into crazy ideas. I mean, in this particular case, if they are following not science but some Pied Piper, that they're more likely to
well, the argument today, the guy in the Journal, his argument was that he and his wife were monitoring this. In other words, he was saying that he thought that he had the training and the judgment, he and his wife together, to not to follow the actual medical professionals, but to make their own independent, qualified decision. And I wanted to say to him, dude, what are your credentials here? What is it that you think you know better than they know?
Well, he got his degree from Facebook, of course.
I'm just saying, and so, you know what, if he catches COVID and dies, no tears for me, because I just can't buy into, I mean, I wear a mask again, not to protect the unvaccinated, but to protect me, because this variant can break through.
Well, we've all heard, my husband and I are both medical doctors, and we have heard from relatives and friends that we don't know what we're talking about, that we should do our research. And we're told this by people who never went to college. So it's very irritating to us, as you can imagine, that people who have no medical training whatsoever are telling us that we're ignorant.
Well, where are they doing their research? See, that's the real question that I want to bring up. What is it that they...
Some people, because they believe it, makes it so.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is, we said this before you came on with Patrick, that there are people who say, well, the vaccine hasn't had enough time for the clinical trials. I mean, based on what? I mean, how long does one have to be in clinical trials? I mean, as I said earlier, we've been doing vaccines since 1917. So there's a lot of data that goes into the development of all these other vaccines for different, tweaking the molecules for different kinds of variants. I mean, and I think that there is a Darwin Award. You know what the Darwin Award is? Yeah.
I absolutely
but for these
do.
people who don't get shots
Award.
and don't get masks,
I know. Well, what we have are thousands of people embracing the Darwin Award instead of the few candidates. I mean, I'm hopping around at the age of 80, still going and all. And I attribute a great deal of that to the fact that I've been vaccinated against everything, including Japanese encephalitis. And, I can't remember what. Yeah. I mean, when I was born, nobody got a choice. You were vaccinated for smallpox in the hospital as a newborn. If you were born in my generation, it wasn't optional. So somebody like me is going to be okay when the smallpox come out of the Siberian tundra, which there is some evidence it may well do. And, I just want to say to people, come on, you know,
Yeah.
but anyway, I didn't mean to go off on that. It just
But
drives
we
me.
can get really upset about this because I get upset every night when I'm talking to my husband about this whole issue.
Well, no, I've just decided to be an unapologetic Darwin, you know, I mean,
Right.
I really do think that survival of the species along the lines we were talking about pheromones and males attracting females, all the rest of it has a great deal to do. I'm not going to live long enough to see the full effect of all this. I'm not going to make it for another 50 or 100 years to see what the fallout of this is, but I'm kind of
never know.
sorry that I won't, because I think that there are so many profound changes that are going to result from, you know, from the experience we're all going through. And it may very well change the composition of the population. So we'll
I-
see. All
I
right,
just-
Patrick, that was much more than you ever wanted to unleash on all our unwary
All right.
viewers. So
Well, actually, I want to hear what Tess was going to say. Tess had a
Oh,
reply
okay.
there.
I just wanted to resolve so I can get on a plane again and go to Europe, please.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, I'm not going to get into that, any of that stuff.
wise decision, Patrick. I took it away from you.
Kathy says, I hate to ask the obvious to Tess, but is there going to be more Rizzolian Isles? And for Gary, what's next for you?
Yes, there's a new Rizzolian Isles coming out. It's number 13. It is called Listen to Me, and it will be out next June. The fun part about this one is it's Jane and Maura, and we get a closer look at Jane's mother, Angela, who is, you know, she's a middle-aged housewife in Revere, and it turns out she is a good detective as well, if only people would believe her. So that's coming out next June.
And the good news is that with any luck, Tess will be at the Poison Pen to discuss it and sign books. At least that's our hope.
Hope so.
Yep. Gary, how about you?
Next book is called Served Cold, as in Revenge is Best Served Cold. It focuses on a novelist whose third book is supposed to be his big breakout book, and set the pace for set the trail for bestsellerdom. He is savaged in a New York Times book review by a young college professor who teaches detective fiction and is trying to impress his tenure committee because he's coming up pretty soon. And he accuses the book of being one of those examples of dumbing down America. And this completely tanks the novelist's future. This next contract is withdrawn. All the publicity he was going to do, or you know, people just bow out of that, and he goes after the reviewer. So if any writers out there have gotten bad reviews, you might like the concept of this book, going after the reviewer.
Stay anonymous when you post your reviews. That's the only way to go. I know Patrick and I do acknowledge our reviews in our own publications at the Poison Pen. We stand. Actually, we have other staff members that write reviews too, and you know, I think it's important that people know who wrote the review.
Okay.
Yeah, I write for Publishers Weekly, and the vast majority of them are anonymous.
Right.
Which in my case is really, really helpful. You know?
You know, it's like Amazon reviews. I asked somebody not long ago why they even bothered to read their Amazon reviews, since, you know, if you don't know who wrote it, what possible difference does it make? But there seems to be some sort of dark pull on authors, you know, where they just can't resist going to Amazon and seeing that they're getting trashed because their book was delivered late, or the cover was torn, or, you know, all the other reasons why all this happens.
Actually, I do have a question for Tess. Considering the milieu of the Rizzolian Isles books, you know, apropos of all we've been talking about, can you tell us a little bit about the book, and is it in this last several year period?
Oh, yeah, it takes place pretty much after the last, I don't know if they're talking about COVID or what, that milieu maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay, it takes place after COVID's over because I don't want to deal with COVID in a novel. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I think a lot of us writers are just, our next stories are, we sort of jump over this period and talk about it as if it's something in the past. And, you know, my characters, they don't shake hands anymore. They visit a hospital to do an interview, and they recall the fact that a lot of people died in this hospital during the pandemic. So it's behind us.
Gotcha.
Story. Yeah.
Same
I
here.
like that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
jump over the puddle. That's
yeah.
kind of a good approach, right?
Well, hopefully it'll be over with. And
Yeah.
if you write a book that's set in the middle of the pandemic, it's going to feel like it's dated already by the time
Right.
it comes.
Right, right. I think that's, let's see here. I think that's about it for the actual questions. Yeah, do you plan to do more collaboration? You've already answered that. Probably not, but who knows? That's
They
about
might
it.
have a drink again together, you know, you just don't ever know the effect of alcohol.
Stay off the booze.
I
You
know,
want to
always
go for a
have
drink
Maui.
this weekend, Tess?
could be. Well, this has really been fun. I'm sorry for my poor impulse control. I have to apologize to everybody who watched this, but you know, every once in a while, that's just the way I roll. Today was it.
So when we're back on planes again, we can see each other in purpose. I'll see you at the bar, people.
Excellent idea. In any case, choose me. As I mentioned before, we do have autographed copies of it, and it's really a wonderful dark academic mystery. And you've heard all the reasons why they wrote it, which are compelling. So I urge you to buy a copy, and we can order more if we run out. So Gary, what a pleasure to host you. It's our debut doing that. And Tess, it's always lovely to see you. So I'll look forward to June for sure, if not before.
See you then.
All right.
Great.
Good night, everybody. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Barbara.
joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.